What I've done is I've asked you here today to discuss the medical examiner's report that came out. There was a story this morning, obviously, in the Oklahoman in reference to how the actual medical examiner's report differed from the initial findings of the police department, I believe is the way it was actually stated in the paper. There were differences in the medical examiner's report than what we had and what our findings were up to this point, so there was a difference, but there was also a difference in reading the medical examiner's report between the narrative in the report and the actual findings. I thought there was a conflict between what the actual medical finding of the report versus what was in the narrative. So as a result of that, I asked the medical examiner to clarify the report, some of the language in the report, the discrepancy that we saw in the report from the direction of the projectiles compared to what the narrative said with the suspect running away from the officer. So I asked him to look at it. I asked the actual medical examiner to look at that, Dr. Pfeiffer. He did that. He got back with me and he provided me with the email that you have possession of right now.
So what were the differences, Chief?
In the report? In the report, it was specifically said in the report in the narrative that the suspect was running away from the officer when the shots were fired, and that was contrary to what the findings were, or what we so far thought in our investigation. Plus, it was also different than what the actual medical findings of the medical examiner was, which was the angle of the projector, the trajectory of the of the rounds. So the body of that report, or at least the narrative, was in conflict with actually the actual evidence from the medical examiner, and so I wanted some clarification on that, because it was really, the report really stated two things. So, and actually the report that came out this morning was based on the narrative that the suspect was running away from the officer.
And the findings prove that he wasn't.
Well, yeah, and again, it's still, we have to provide our findings, all the interviews that we've done of all the witnesses, people on the scene, and then include that with the medical examiner's report to the district attorney. In this case, it's McLean County. So we have to provide all that, and they have to look at that and make a determination themselves. But our concern is that, yeah, our findings in our investigation were in conflict with the narrative of the medical examiner's report. It wasn't in conflict with the actual medical findings, where it talks about the rounds being 4 rounds in the upper back. There were actually 2 rounds in front, 1 in the thigh, 1 in the arm. Which would be consistent with the suspect facing the officer. It'd have to be, if it's in the thigh and in the front of the arm, they have to be facing. He wouldn't be running away. And then the other projectiles were actually the trajectory that was listed in the medical examiner's report was high into the back and in a downward projection. You didn't have exit wounds, but you did have a downward projection. Well, if the suspect's running away from you, that's impossible. You can't have a round that goes in the upper top shoulder at an angle and go down to the lower back if you're running away from the officer, or you're running away from the shots being fired. So it contradicted what we knew. So that's why we wanted a clarification, and the medical examiner stated that narrative was wrong, as stated in the email that he sent me. And he will be doing a supplemental report to that to state that.
And just to be clear, what exactly do you believe Salazar was doing at the time he was shot?
Well, I mean, without going into all the details, because really, I mean, the district attorney needs to look at that evidence. But our findings are not that he was running away, that he was actually confronting the officer with a knife, had the knife that he used to stab the canine, still had the knife, the officer and him were in close proximity facing each other, and that the officer felt a threat and discharged his firearm. So, and you have two rounds. You have 1 in the thigh, which would be consistent with a suspect facing you, also in the arm. And at that point, the other ones could be consistent with him folding over towards the officer with the rounds, still firing shots at him with the rounds going towards the back, not directly in the back, but at an angle from the top of the shoulder, because the trajectory were still in him and actually went downward towards the back. So it'd have to be from the top, as if you were bent over, shooting down on him.